Welcome back to the Mining Mum podcast. I'm Tegan, your host, and today I have Brock with me. Brock is a tradie. He has transitioned and developed his way into leadership roles and has recently transitioned his skills as an ops and regional manager for a contracting company to now work for a mining company. So I'm so excited. Brock is going to talk to us about his journey transitioning from a plumber into a leader, into a high-end leader managing multiple people, and then transitioning over his skills to a mining company. So thanks so much, Brock, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tegan.
So should we talk about the early years, how you originally got into being a plumber and doing your apprenticeship?
Yeah, well, becoming a plumber, that was probably really easy. My dad was a plumber. He worked for a large plumbing firm. I didn't struggle at school, but I didn't apply myself that well. So I always knew I was going to go down the trade path. And I did take the easy route, and I took a job that my dad pretty much gave me. And I worked for a really, really big plumbing company, which was fortunate because I got to learn a lot about plumbing, industrial piping, roofing, civil works. We did everything from large hospitals, large high-rise buildings to international airports back home in Cairns. So, that's how I basically joined up in the plumbing business. And, from there, things really transitioned well into mining.
Yeah. So how did you hear about mining? Obviously being over in Cairns, and then what kind of helped you make the jump to move over to Port Hedland where you're currently living?
Yeah, the understanding of mining, especially in WA when you're in far north Queensland, you're very, very sheltered from it. There's a lot of mining far north of Cairns. It's more bauxite. But even then at that stage, I had no idea what they mined. But it was about 2009. I bought a unit back home in Cairns a couple of years before that. The GFC had just hit, so overtime was getting taken away from us, and it was getting a little bit harder to make ends meet and just have a lifestyle. So I spoke to my partner at the time, who's now actually my wife. Thought about joining the mining industry, and being a plumber, there's not very many options out there. So I put myself out at a couple companies. I applied, and I remember the day very clear. I was working on a fire main back home at the Cairns TAFE. We were doing a extension on there, and I got a phone call, and I was a bit hot and bothered when I was doing it. And I picked it up, and I had saved this person's number on my phone. I was like, oh, that's Terry from Goodline. That was the company I worked for at the time. I better answer this. And basically the call was, how quick can you get to Port Hedland? So after working 10 years in the mining industry, in the plumbing industry back home in Cairns, I took the plunge to work in Port Hedland as a plumber.
Yeah. And okay, so you moved over. How old were you?
I was 26 at the time. I turned 27 not long after that. Yeah.
So 27-year-old, used to the Cairns lifestyle, plumber, tradie. What was it like moving to Port Hedland? And then did your partner come, and what was her thoughts as well?
Good question. So I did FIFO for the first probably only 3 months because things really transitioned quickly. I started as a plumber, and one thing I identify early. So probably firstly the lifestyle thing. Back to your question is it was different, but Cairns is a real party lifestyle, and back then it was very busy in Port Hedland. The boom was happening. There was people doing 4 and 1, so they were getting days off in between. So a lot of the pubs were thriving. There was a bit of a party lifestyle, but I was there for a different reason. But outside of the paradise Cairns is and coming to Port Hedland, it was a bit of a shock to the system. But I didn't know many people, so I didn't understand the better things that Port Hedland had.
Yeah. And so, you came over as a plumber, and then how did you kind of get into your first leadership role, and then what did you kind of transition to after that?
Yeah. So when I first got here, I was a little bit lucky. Where I was from in Cairns was really a hard blue collar sort of culture, sink or swim. We were reading drawings when we were first-year apprentices. I was looking after a set of units by the time I was a fourth-year apprentice in Port Douglas, because most of the tradies didn't want to drive up there, so it was a good opportunity for me. So when I first came to Port Hedland, I noticed that maybe those hardened skills and thrown in the deep end, I noticed that I had abilities that other plumbers didn't have. Some of them were really, getting held by their supervisor's hand to read drawings, and I would turn up to job sites and they'd be like, "Oh, hey, just wait a minute. I'll show you what you need to do." I'm like, just give me a set of drawings. I'm all right. Like I'll work it out. And I kind of noticed that there was an opportunity to grow there, and also I wanted my wife to move over, and housing back then was really difficult. A standard house in South Hedland was $2,500 a week's rent.
Wow.
You can't afford that.
Yeah.
So I was lucky enough that an opportunity presented itself to be the superintendent of the plumbing and industrial piping section of the contractor I worked for. And I thought about it hard, and it was a big leap. Like, I was only 27 at the time. I'd only been in the mining industry for, I would say 3 or 4 months by then, by the time we were having these conversations. And when I first started, I didn't even know what iron ore was. Like, and all of a sudden I'm getting asked to be the superintendent of this division, and I decided to take the plunge, and the housing was the big factor there, and obviously it was a nice pay increase as well, and kicked off after being in the industry for 6 months as a superintendent at the age of 27.
Wow, that must have been pretty crazy. And like, how many people were you leading when you made that jump?
So it's relatively small in comparison to some of the other roles I had, but I think probably we started with about 25 plumbers, and I think at one stage you would have peaked around 35 to 40 plumbers. Being a niche trade, it's not always as much demand as some of the more traditional fitting and boilermaker and electrical trades that the same business I worked for had. So, relatively small.
Yeah. And then, as you mentioned, you went on to other roles that did have more people. What was your transition into that next step? And did you do any additional training to get into those roles?
From a training standpoint, not really. A couple internal leadership trainings, but probably a lot of experience learnings, learning from mistakes. I transitioned into the operations manager role at the same company I worked for. So I was a superintendent there for 9 years, and I transitioned to the ops manager role. When I was in that role, I did probably learn a lot about myself, maybe a little bit before that, but the real sort of teamwork side and really understanding people's behaviours and the why behind things, I really identified a step up in a leadership understanding and probably a leadership capability of myself as well.
Yeah. And at that point, I know that company that you work for was one of the biggest kind of contracting companies up here. How many people would you have had to manage?
Yeah, so on a day-to-day basis, because the company I work for was really set on locals only, it'd be 250 locals.
Wow.
So, quite big. And then when shuts came on, we could get up to another 250. So for a small period, you could have up to 500 people, and 250 of them you didn't even know who they were. So more of a fly in, fly out labour hire arrangement. So things got really busy at those stages.
Yeah. And what do you think in terms of a leader, like going so fast into all of those roles, managing 250 people? How did you how did you do it, basically? Did you have anything that kind of kept you going through it? Is it delegation? Is it what is the key to managing that many people?
Yeah, certainly starting into the manager's role, my delegation skills weren't really where they needed to be because, it was kind of a one-stop shop in a smaller plumbing and piping department we were working in. But I worked out quick that it wasn't possible to achieve anything without pulling levers, especially when you're the ops manager. You really need to make sure that your internal engineering and administration team is operating well, and also your stores team and so forth. So I worked out that there was an opportunity for that team to work a little bit more harmonious. They was really busy in some areas, and some other areas were really looking for work, which was great because I had heaps of work to give them. So developed a daily catch up every morning with a bit of a heat map type board on the environment of the day, who was the busiest, who had work, who was looking for work, and basically what the lagging indicators and the leading indicators onto how much work we had as an operations department there. And I felt that those levers really empowered people to speak up and enabled people to get more work. So it was really pleasing. It was a bit of a dartboard throw, that board, no pun intended, but it did work. So it was great. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good, having like the perfect systems, procedures, and then working with your team and delegation. Now, you said you went into the regional manager as young 30s, going into a regional manager of a massive company. How did that take a toll on your young family? And then what kind of made you, how did you manage that? Did you manage your family, young family, and then, also having such a big responsibility at work?
Yeah, so when I took the next step to the regional manager's role, essentially there's no one to escalate up to or get support from a regional standpoint. There was a lot of long hours. I recall getting to work at, some silly time of the morning at 3 a.m. and getting home at 10 or 11 o'clock, and it was difficult. And there was a lot of demand at the time. We had COVID on, so people couldn't come into the state, but also there was so much opportunity to win work at the time, especially if you were local. We had a unique service we could provide, but it definitely did take its toll on myself and my family as well. Lots of big hours, lots of hard work, lots of drive, and lots of support from my family, lots of support from the people within the team too, but they were also experiencing those, peaks. There weren't many troughs. There was plenty of peaks. It was very dynamic times, but I do thank my wife for sticking strong in those times. Definitely difficult and long hours. Things are a lot better these days, that's for sure.
Yeah. So now you've transitioned into a superintendent role in a mining company. What was your motivation to making that transition?
Yeah, the position I'm in now was a position I worked with closely for a long time, especially in the early days when I was doing a lot of the piping related works. And it was a job that always intrigued me, and definitely I saw it as an opportunity for my skill sets to transition. And fortunately, at the time the job was advertised, it was also a time I was looking for self-development. I felt like I learned so much at the contracting company I worked for, and I thank them greatly for it. But I was at the stage of my career where it wasn't so much about career development. There was a little bit of self-develop inside me. I had some great mentors in my early days, but I was starting to see a lot of opportunity for mentors on the client side of things, being a contractor, and I was aspiring to maybe be a little bit more, have behaviours that surround those types of people. So I applied for the role, and I didn't know what to think, but I hadn't applied for any roles at the company I worked for before, and things escalated quite quickly. And next thing I know, I was employed in the site services superintendent role, the role I'm in at the moment, and definitely enjoying it.
Yeah. And so in terms of a day in the life for you, what would a day in the life look like in your role now? Yeah,
day in the life, it's a busy role, which is fine because I'm used to that, and it does drive me. I do thrive on the thrill of the pressure a little bit, but our assets are a little bit unique. They're spread between port and rail. Some assets are very, very critical to the supply chain, and some assets aren't so critical. So day in the life is making sure you're on the front foot early, because you've got 12 hours you haven't been on site, because we do day shift only. So our assets are operating and critical to the supply chain for 12 hours when we're essentially not at work. So making sure those night shift teams understand that we're in a position to hand that baton over and take on, and make sure that you've got a good battle plan for the day ahead to manage that what's ever happened the night before, and to set up for the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you get in 6 a.m., you go to pre-starts.
Yeah, so 6 a.m. you get in, usually go to we've got 4 teams in our department, usually go to one of the pre-starts, one of the level ones. So it's at 6. I usually head over to our workshop if I'm not there already, because 3 out of the 4 L1s are already there. Catch up with the team, and then we have a 7 o'clock catch up every morning as well, that varies from a 15 to 20 minute catch up to an hour catch up, depending what day it is and what pillars we go through. But yeah, the main crux of that is to what I said before, is make sure we're set up for the day and make sure we understand what areas of our critical equipment need attention to for that morning.
Yeah. And then the rest of the day is at meetings, like all the other superintendents.
So
lots of meetings.
That's the good thing about getting in early at the business we work in. You do get caught up in a lot of meetings. You also need to understand what meetings you can delegate to, and what meetings are you needed. And you don't always get that right. You may turn up to a meeting that you probably should have delegated, because your skill set doesn't really give much input to. And then also there's times when you have delegated and you've probably thrown your supervisor under the bus a little bit, so to speak. But yeah, it's all about learning.
Yeah. And before we wrap up today, what advice would you give somebody if they were a tradie and they're looking to develop themselves into more of the leadership roles?
Yeah, good question. I think it's important to be yourself. Really hone in on the strengths you have. Work hard. Don't get caught up in that crowd mentality. Push through those barriers and always see the positive in things. You will go a long way if you show a lot of work ethic. Your attitude is always above the line. You will find that everything comes a lot easier, and you will get recognised a lot quicker.
That's awesome. Thanks, Brooke. And thanks to everybody that joined us today. The 3 key takeaways that I took away from your podcast today was, the first one is that, in the beginning of your early trade, you saw your abilities and backed yourself to go into those leadership roles. So I think the key takeaway with that one was backing yourself. The second one was, as you grew into higher roles up in the chain, you really learned how to delegate, hard skill in the beginning, giving over some of that delegation, but then leveraging off the processes and the systems that were already in place at that company. And then the third key takeaway was, if you are transitioning or you want to transition into those leadership roles, is really applying yourself in those technician roles. So going over and above, not just following the crowd, but going over and above and applying yourself to those roles, because you do get noticed. So yeah, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tegan.